Back in 2019, Love Alarm showed up on Netflix and immediately took the K-drama world by storm. Taking the compelling elements of sci-fi-esque dating apps and high school romance, Love Alarm cut a unique slice of the streaming pie for itself. For those who need a quick recap, the background here revolves around an app, unsurprisingly, called Love Alarm. This measures love interests within a certain radius, and if someone steps within your circle, the phone pings to let you someone nearby loves you. There's no guesswork, no awkward first dates, and certainly no cringy rejections either. Only, this app comes with a heavy burden, and interestingly our central protagonist JoJo finds herself in the middle of this, shielded from the pressures thanks to her love alarm being hidden. The first season then effectively built up a love triangle around this premise, with Kim JoJo left at the end with her two prospect love interests, Sun-Oh and his best friend Hae-young. Armed with an agonizing cliffhanger ending, and lots of unanswered questions, fans scrambled for news of a second season. With Netflix giving the green light for that, the fanbase essentially split into Team Sun-Oh and Team Hae-young, convinced that JoJo would choose their mascot. And after a lengthy delay, Love Alarm is finally here, and more importantly, the answer to who JoJo will choose. This time around though, Love Alarm recklessly jumps forward in time, writing off that cliffhanger to see our characters out of high school, and on to the great beyond. JoJo is still studying, Sun-Oh is off modeling, while Hae-young now has an office job. Spicing things up however, is the public announcement of Love Alarm version 2.0. This enhancement on the popular app now boasts the ability to track who will fall in love with you in the near future. One of those names happens to be JoJo, who inexplicably pops up on Hae-young's app very early on. This brief background is essentially where we start season 2, and while the first managed to keep you guessing until the end, second season does not. In fact, this 6-episode K-drama plays out as a middling paint-by-numbers canvas. You'll guess what's going to happen here within the first 10 minutes of the show starting, and Love Alarm never even thinks about deviating from that path. This love triangle essentially peters out after the first 4 episodes or so too, leaving episodes 5 and 6 to play catch-up with the underwhelming subplots we've been half following before. These come in 2 distinct flavors, with JoJo's cousin Mulgai gallivanting off on a quest of her own, determined to find the founding developer of Love Alarm. Her story uses up a good chunk of time too, but although it's played off for comedy relief, it's not actually very funny. Alongside that is a murder mystery of sorts, carried over from the first season and revolving around the Love Alarm killer. There's a nice reveal around this, but to be honest it's given so little screen time that it barely even registers on the radar when the truth is revealed. It just sort of feels like it's been haphazardly lumped into the final episodes to patch everything up. That leaves the CTO of Love Alarm, Brian Cho, who may or may not know what happened to missing in action Duck Gu from the first season. Again, keen watchers will probably figure this out early on, backing up the notion that this really doesn't have a lot of mystery or compelling twists to speak of. It also doesn't help that stylistically the show is a bit of a mess. The editing feels choppy, some of the dialogue stretches on for far too long, while other times a weird dreamy filter gives the impression we're in a flashback when we're not, something that's made worse when an actual flashback shows up. It's not all bad, though, and this show does have some redeeming features. There's a bit more background into Hae-young's past, while JoJo also gets a chance to confront her past demons too. Some wonderfully imaginative imagery is used here as well, especially when it comes to the hand-drawn segments which are woven so well into the fabric of this series. Ultimately though, Love Alarm serves up a lukewarm offering that's going to feel colder for fans expecting a red-hot follow-up to what's come before. If you can go in with no expectations, Love Alarm certainly has enough to enjoy, but there's equally nothing here that really stands out. This follow-up uses all the K-drama tricks in the book, and does so with very little aplomb. This is one alarm that's very unlikely to ring for a third. Episode 1 of Love Alarm Season 2 begins with a beautiful montage, combining hand-drawn animation with live-action snippets. This serves as a brief moment of tranquility as we then cut back to JoJo. 4 years have passed since Love Alarm's inception, and Love Alarm 2.0 is a big thing now. The brainchild behind all of this is Brian Chan, who's the CTO of the company. JoJo is late to class, but hurries in just in time, ready to start her lesson. There, JoJo receives a message from Lee Hae-young asking to meet. Well, she does just this as her love alarm goes off. He's finished work early, prompting the duo to sit and eat together at the cafeteria. Hae-young makes a big show about ringing her love alarm, stepping in and out of the circle. As he sits and talks to her, finally, he admits that Love Alarm 2.0 is coming along nicely and eventually will lead to JoJo loving him. Well, Jojo is conflicted as she heads over to Hae-young's apartment. Still, she enjoys her time with him, snapping photos and commenting on the cherry blossoms outside. He looks longingly at her as she envelops herself in the curtains. Only, as he looks set to kiss her, the entire curtain pole falls. Meanwhile, Sunho attends a photo shoot with Yukjo, but leaves midway through, feeling sad. He believes Jojo may still have feelings for him, and the love alarm situation is still a sensitive subject for him. Back home though, he comes under fire for his misdeeds last season, as his father berates him. His mother isn't much better either, only caring about money, and hiding her smoking from Sunho's father. She knows that Sunho was crushing on Jojo too, and calls him out for it. At work, Gulmi does her live stream, but after losing viewers, decides to turn the attention toward Jojo. Specifically, she breaks the news that she's the artist for the ringing world. Unfortunately, this leads to a shady guy waiting for Jojo after work, charging down the street trying to catch her. Thankfully Hae-young shows up, and saves the day. As it begins raining, Hae-young encourages Jojo to stay at his house that evening. With Hae-young putting the curtains back up again, Jojo creeps over, and kisses him on the cheek, wishing him good night. However, doubts continue to plague her mind as she contemplates whether to get rid of her shield and figure out her true feelings. In the morning, Gulmi learns that several developers have been caught and are currently being held in the police station. It turns out they've developed a code to fake ring an alarm bell, which she jumps on. The culprit gives her an email address and claims to be able to help, something he'll do in exchange for helping him out his predicament. Gulmi, predictably, agrees to help. Meanwhile, Jojo goes searching for Dukgu, believing that Brian Chan may actually be his alias. Given the brief little flashback segments we receive, it seems like this may actually be true. Well, first of all she heads back to school as memories of the past dreamily bleed through. Cutting back to the present, Jojo's love alarm is rung. But by who? Well, as she opens up a door none other than Sunho is sitting. Episode 2 of Love Alarm Season 2 begins with Sunho catching up with Jojo at school. He asks how Hae-young is before eventually asking if she's okay. She doesn't answer though, and instead tells him she needs to leave. At the police station, Jojo receives Dukgu's address. Only, the officer there breaks the news that he's actually dead. Jojo is obviously distraught and sits outside, crying on the steps of the school. Sunho notices her, but thinks twice about heading over and offering comfort, instead driving back home. Jojo is left with her thoughts, deliberating on Dukgu's talk about the shield and sword. Checking her tablet, she shows off a picture of a young girl hiding behind a shield, arrows piercing the front. Jojo shows up at Hae-young's place, and the two head out together for a romantic evening. They laugh and forget about their problems, at least for a while. Jojo propositions him with a trip abroad too, pointing out a plane above. As they head back home, the pair discuss Brian Chan. Hae-young admits he hasn't met him yet but wants to. They say their goodbyes, but just before parting ways, Hae-young turns and tells her he's going to keep liking her no matter what. Jojo forces a smile before heading home and posting her shield picture. It receives mixed responses from her audience. Meanwhile, Sunho finds himself conflicted over what to do, eventually deciding to attend an upcoming press conference. This happens to be reserved for Badge Club members too. Well, night turns to day and Jojo catches up with Munwin, who happens to have books all around her. Jojo shows her best friend her phone, which includes a message from Brian Chan. Within this, he asks to meet. She still thinks this could be Dukgu's doing, especially given his reasons for starting Love Alarm are eerily similar to that of Brian Chan. In the morning, Jojo activates her shield, being careful to keep everything a secret. She messages Hae-young on the way to work and asks to meet. Only, Hae-young is caught up with his own issues and rejects her meeting. Jojo still leaves strawberries on his door though, unbeknownst to her, that he's actually out to visit his father in prison. The Badge Club begins, and both Jojo and Sunho happen to be in attendance. Jojo sits with Brian Chan and asks about the shield feature. She wants to get rid of it, determined to find out where her heart truly lies. She also figures out that Brian and Dukgu are one and the same, especially given he was the only one who knew about the shield feature. Tellingly though, Brian tells her Dukgu is gone and admits there's no way to get rid of the app. As Jojo walks away, Sunho catches up with her and talks about the shield on the stairwell. He figures out that she's had this installed for a while, as she apologizes to him for not telling the truth. Given Hae-young is unaware of this, Jojo is put in a difficult position. Episode 3 of Love Alarm Season 2 begins with Hae Young deliberating over his father, worried about his past. He wonders what Jojo will think about it too, unbeknownst to him that she too is keeping secrets. As we cut across to Jojo, she admits to Sunho that she installed the shield because of him. Apparently now it has nothing to do with him, but Sunho knows that Jojo has feelings for him. He calls after her as Jojo hurries down the stairwell and away from the badge club. When Jojo leaves, Sunho confronts Brian and asks about the shield feature. He mentions how 4 years of his life have been destroyed because of this, and even threatens to tell the reporters as well. Taking off his badge, Sunho throws it on the floor and walks away. Hae Young finds Jojo at the bus stop and lies, telling her he was home all day. Only, back at his apartment the strawberries are still on the door. He sees this too later that day, realizing that Jojo knows he wasn't there and being caught out with his lie. Hae Young continues to feel conflicted the next day as he heads off to visit his mum. They discuss Hae Young's father and she begins crying, apologizing for what's happened. As Hae Young heads outside, he runs into Sunho. Sunho admits he met Jojo earlier in the day, and brings up the question of Hae Young's love alarm, which still hasn't rung yet. Hae Young finds himself mulling over this but leaves silently all the same. He catches up with Jojo, telling her he's sorry for lying, and that he has somewhere he needs to go. Jojo supports him, helping to do his tie-up as they talk under the cherry blossoms. Holding hands, Jojo walks him to the prison as he heads in alone to see his father. Hae Young's father claims that he's changed now, mentioning religion and how well he's doing because of it. Hae Young, however, can't shake the feeling that he's just like his father, and could end up like him. Suddenly his father snaps, demanding he sign his release forms as guards take him away. On the back of this, Hae Young refuses to sign the papers and decides to keep his father locked up. As he leaves the prison, Hae Young begins sobbing. Jojo comforts him though, as the pair ride the bus home. At the same time, Gulmi talks to the CDG developer who tells her to begin gaining 300 hearts for herself. If she can do that, then she'll be given a ticket into the badge club. As she squeals in delight, we head across to Brian Chan, who happens to be in Dukgu's apartment. He knows the password to get into the computer too, and the browser window shows swords and shields. Meanwhile, Sunho and Yukjo come to blows after the photoshoot. Yukjo is not happy, bringing up the badge club and his constant feelings for Jojo. She tells him they can't do this anymore as tears well up in her eyes. Sunho eventually heads home and stands on the balcony with his mother. Down by the docks, we cut to a pretty unnerving sequence as a young girl is grabbed. Her phone falls in the water, having had the love alarm rung just before. This seems to be setting up for a murder mystery angle to this one. Meanwhile, Jojo heads on the bus intending to meet Hae Young. Only, Sunho rocks up in his car and chases after the bus, constantly honking his horn. He follows her all the way to school and confronts her outside. Sunho kisses the girl tentatively, realizing that the look in her eye hints toward her liking him. As we cut across to Hae Young, Jojo fades from. Episode 4 of Love Alarm Season 2 begins with a beautiful hand-drawn segment as Jojo finds herself at a crossroads, unsure which path to take. As she checks both ways, we cut back to the present. Sunho tells Jojo to look in her heart and understand where her feelings really lie. As the rain starts pouring, neither of them have an umbrella and end up getting absolutely drenched. Jojo heads back inside, though, and receives a message from Hae Young, mentioning this very fact. Jojo is worried about the Sunho incident, though, and heads off to visit Hae Young at work. She hugs him tightly outside and begins sobbing. Watching from one of the cameras happens to be Brian Chan, who snaps out of his entranced look as he hears back from the police. It turns out they're requesting a copy of Love Alarm's logs, so they can track down the killer from the docks. Hae Young walks Jojo home, making her smile as he does the "you put your left leg in, left leg out" jig to make Jojo's love alarm ring. It makes her smile too, as she clings to this memory and heads inside. There, she notices Gulmi's phone ping with the CDG email from before. Heading up to the roof, she receives a message from an unknown number. It's a link, accompanied by a message claiming she may need what's being offered. She doesn't answer it though, and instead leaves it in her text messages for later. Sunho once again stalks Hae Young, this time riding the bus, but keeping his distance from her. She eventually figures out he's following her, and confronts him. Sunho asks about the time she showed up at his house, before they broke up, as Jojo explains to him. Well, Sunho eventually leaves and checks his phone, noticing numerous messages from Yukjo's team. She's gone AWOL, and no one seems to know where she is. Well, it turns out she's at her house, so clearly they weren't looking very hard. As Suno arrives and tries talking to her, it turns out Yukjo has already moved on and leaves with another guy. While they head off together, Yukjo checks her phone and notices the video featuring Suno and Jojo has gone viral. When Jojo finds out this very same fact, she hurries back on the bus and heads home. Only, she misses Hai Yeong, who shows up at the school desperate to find her. This eventually brings her into the convenience store, where he finds Gulmi working. She's still struggling to find anyone who likes her, despite a whole day of doing her best in the shop. When Suno shows up, Hai Yeong suddenly lashes out and hits him in the face. Hai Yeong bemoans him only thinking about himself. Suno returns the favor, telling him the same thing as our male lead stumbles away. It's a pretty contrived fight in truth. Hai Yeong eventually finds Jojo sitting on a bench and hurries up to find her. He hugs her, telling the girl not to be sad anymore. He invites her back to his apartment, where Jojo notices the letter from the district county up on the table. She doesn't say anything though, and instead helps patch up his face. On the way home, Jojo opens the link she received from the unknown number. This happens to be for something called the Spear, which allows you to ring the love alarm of a person of her choosing. For now, she deliberates over who to use that with. That evening, Suno confronts Jojo, who tells him that her mind is made up and she's picking Hai Yeong. Given the viral video and what's happened, she only cares about Hai Yeong and his feelings, admitting that Suno hasn't once crossed his mind. She wants to be with Hai Yeong. At home, Jojo starts looking through the photos she and Hai Yeong took together. Sobbing, she realizes that her choice is obvious as she hurries off to meet him. As the sun begins to rise, Jojo uses her spear to pierce Hai Yeong's heart. Not literally of course, although that would be more interesting, but as she steps forward, Hai Yeong's love alarm. Episode 5 of Love Alarm Season 2 begins with Hai Yeong surprised that his alarm has finally rang. He admits to Jojo that this is a nice feeling, as he throws his arms around her and hugs the girl tightly. It's a breakthrough moment for the couple, as both Jojo and Hai Yeong start to open up to one another. He even offers to pick her up after school too. While Jojo deliberates over her journal entries, Brian Chan learns that an unauthorized code was installed on Jojo's phone that evening. This is, of course, in relation to the spear that she initiated with Jojo. This leads Brian to begin investigating, eventually coming face to face with Hai Yeong. He holds his arm sympathetically and leaves the building. When he does, Brian heads to the shadowy apartment where a bed and a heart monitor happen to be. Brian loses his temper and slams the flower pot on the floor, wondering quite what Duk-gu is up to. This now confirms what many of us have suspected for a while: Duk-gu is still alive. Meanwhile, Suno continues to reel over what happened in the previous episode. He visits his mother, who scoffs at the whole notion of the love alarm concept, and confirms that his father is the one who's been cheating on her all this time. This is why she's been unable to ring his love alarm. Yukjo heads off to meet Jojo, admitting that she's seen the viral video, and knows Suno will never get over her. Yukjo feels defeated, unable to compete with his feelings. Well, both Suno and Hai Yeong show up next, with the former realizing that Jojo's love alarm has gone off. She claims to have done this by her own free will. The camera then weirdly shifts off to a long-distance shot, as the two go their separate ways after finally saying their piece. Unfortunately, this has ramifications for Yukjo, who has her contract cancelled in the wake of Suno's true feelings coming out. Meanwhile, Hai Yeong buys Jojo a bicycle bell. Of course, this is a funny little inside joke toward her ringing his love alarm. Anyway, this all comes crashing down when Brian shows up and confronts Jojo about the spear. Specifically, he figures out what the spear does, and believes that she's in collusion with Duk-gu. He demands to know where he is, but Jojo claims she doesn't know what he's talking about. When this fails, he tells her to be honest and lays out everything that's happened up to this point. Jojo has a lot to think about, especially when she heads home later that day. Gulmi, who has previously manipulated her way onto the hot person list, comes home squealing. She also casually mentions how she's just seen Hai Yeong outside. It turns out Hai Yeong heard everything Brian had to say and now knows the truth. This brings him to Suno, where he asks about the shield and spear. This exposes Jojo's lies, as the two guys talk about what's happened thus far. In the wake of this, Jojo heads outside and finds Hai Yeong waiting at the top of the hill. They both ring each other's love alarm, of course, as Hai Yeong admits that he heard everything with Brian. As they talk about their feelings, Hai Yeong walks away, defeated. As he gets on a bus and leaves, Jojo is left watching him. Episode 6 of Love Alarm Season 2 begins in the past at school, as we see Jojo doing laps, while Duk-gu works out the algorithm to love alarm on the floor in chalk. As the familiar love alarm cloud formation shows in the sky, we cut back to the present. Suno's audition has gone pretty well. In fact, he's actually been invited to show up the following day too. At the same time, both Jojo and Hae-young find themselves depressed after their apparent breakup last episode. However, the latter is snapped out of his mood as police rush to the scene and start collecting up stuff from the tables. Jojo finds herself crying at the bus stop. However, that creepy guy from episode 1 appears and asks how she feels. He holds her wrist, but she pulls away. As the truth is revealed, it turns out this is the love alarm killer, and he's done all this on the back of being inspired by the Ringing World graphic novels. He heads out into the road and is immediately grabbed by police officers. They arrest him, but this entire scene is really poorly edited. Lackluster elevator music fills the background, accompanied by slow motion edits and some shaky camera work. Eventually this culminates in the police taking him away, and the murder subplot finishing. In the wake of this, Jojo looks over her work for the Ringing World, and gives her statement at the police station. She tells them her drawings weren't an instruction manual, and is shocked that someone would use them in that way. On the back of the suicides that occurred last season, Jojo blames herself for continuing to post art. She eventually writes online why she drew what she did. It turns out she was the sole survivor of a mass suicide back when she was a child, and her artwork was an outlet to express her thoughts surrounding this. With her truths revealed, Jojo messages Suno and asks to meet. Here, they gain some closure as Jojo apologizes and says goodbye to Suno properly. She's going to run her marathon and use it as an outlet to clear up everything that's been bothering her all this time. She messages Hae-young next, promising to come back when she's finished. With no preparation and no prior training, Jojo obviously struggles, but uses this marathon as a chance to face her past. She then comes to terms with the fact that what happened wasn't her fault. Jojo miraculously makes it to the finish line though, where Hae-young happens to be there waiting. Well, I say the finish line. She actually doesn't finish the race before they start hugging. That's definitely going to mess up her time. Meanwhile, Brian Chan leaves the police station to a barrage of reporters around him. It turns out he was questioned by the police all evening regarding the security of Love Alarm. This eventually sees him return to the office, where Dukgu is situation, still alive but seemingly kept to the shadows for now. He tells his brother to stick to being a developer and give up on releasing 2.0 for now. We then jump forward in time by a month. Gulmi is part of the elite club and meets Dukgu. He rings her love alarm and confirms that he's actually the founding developer she's wanted to meet all this time. 5 years have passed, but now that Dukgu is successful, she starts to change her mind about him. In fact, he's even developing another app that channels whether someone tells the truth or not. Eventually she walks away, heading home where she notices that her online shop has been promoted online. Suno and Hae-young eventually meet up again and reconcile their differences. Suno admits that he's looking after himself a lot more now and gained a lot by moving on. In fact, that includes starring in a brand new movie too. Yukjo sees this announcement online while she's out and thinks twice about skipping town. As she arrives back at her apartment and plays the recorded messages from her door, she notices Suno. In fact, he repeatedly rang her doorbell over time, hoping to see her again. Realizing that he does care about her, Yukjo heads out into the hallway just in time for her to come face to face with Suno. He promises to come back every day to try and ring her alarm. Hae-young meets Dukgu and they talk about Love Alarm and its inception. Dukgu admits he doesn't regret anything that's happened and hands over something to help her find closure in her life. It's a mix-up, a collection of all the times Jojo rang Hae-young's alarm. Only, the tape player doesn't work, so Jojo and Hae-young chuckle, deciding to abandon it and head out for food instead. While they walk away, hand in hand, the tape player actually starts as we receive a really touching montage of all the moments this pair rang each other's love alarm. This goes all the way back to the opening episode of Season 2 as well, where we see Jojo ringing his love alarm while they were at Hae-young's. Love Alarm's finale bows out with a pretty tepid conclusion, finishing up all our big plot points, but doing so in an obvious and ham-fisted way. Hae-young and Jojo being together has been painfully clear since the first 10 minutes of the opening episode, and it's disappointing to see the show take such a cookie-cutter approach to their romance. In fact, this season has had every cliché in the book, including the obvious longing stares, the betrayal, the sidewalk glances across the road and the ensuing montage at the end. Now, to be fair, the montage is actually quite good, although it would have been nice to see this go all the way back to season 1, and for both Hae-young and Sun-oh too. Speaking of which, Sun-oh has a pretty underwhelming arc here, with his story pushed aside and thrown into this contrived love triangle with only one solution. It's quite reminiscent of Startup in some ways, where we all knew Dalmi and Doosan would get together, but narratively it feels like the wrong choice. Well, the same is true here, although Sun-oh does eventually end up with Yukjo. Still, one can't help but feel these two could have benefited from having extra screen time to develop their relationship a bit more. As it stands, it's pretty clear that Sun-oh doesn't really love her and would drop Yukjo at the first sign of interest from Jojo. Still, it's at least something to tape over that wound, which I guess is better than nothing. Elsewhere, Deok-gu makes an appearance, and the only surprise here is that it's not actually Brine. In fact, Deok-gu has been alive all this time, kept in solitude, and then eventually showing up 5 years later like nothing's happened. Still, it's good to see he didn't actually die last season, and the show does a good job giving him some important exposition to deliver on to the audience. Overall though, Love Alarm Season 2 is a pretty lackluster follow-up. It's a season that had one question to answer: Hae-young or Sun-oh, and does so in the most obvious and cookie-cutter way possible. It's not a bad season per se, but it's certainly not as intriguing as season 1. Instead, what we're left with then are 6 episodes of formulaic romantic drama, ending with a really nice montage to a really average season.